Hello there, all my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina of CSLdesigns, and today I'm going to show you how to make this wirework bracelet made from a 7-strand braid. And I also added in beads along the edges to add in some colour. So if you want to learn how to make your own, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now the gauge of wire that I'm using here is a 0.8mm regular round copper wire. And then the beads that I'm going to add in are these 3mm rounds. Now I'm using some blue coated hematite gemstone beads, but you can of course choose whatever you want to. Just make sure the holes are large enough to take the wire through. I'm then going to use these ribbon ends here to finish off the ends of my braid alongside my E6000 glue as well. It's nice and strong. Our ribbon ends then have these little loops where we can attach our findings. So I've got my extended chain and loft or claw clasp, and of course some jump rings to put it together. So to help make the braid as well, I'm also going to be using this spring clamp here. It's going to be able to hold onto the wires and make it easier to work with. You can also use a ring clamp, but otherwise I'm going to have the material list and useful links in the description box down below the video. So let's get all the materials ready and let's get started. So I then cut 7 lengths of my wire of about 40 centimeters each, and just make sure there's no kinks or bends in them. So I then took all my lengths of wire and made sure the ends were even, and I then added them into the spring clamp here. So that's going to hold onto them nicely. So we can then start braiding, and what I want to just do first of all is separate my wires. So I'm just going to have 4 lengths all towards one side and the remaining 3 towards the other. Doesn't matter what side you do what, but then to start the braiding you're just going to start on the side with 4 wires. So I'm going to start with the very outer one. Now do bear in mind that we're using wire, which reacts quite differently say than using cord or something. But I'm taking the very outer one, and then the structure of this braid is that I'm going to go over 1 wire, so bring it over the next one in, and then I'm going to go under 2, so the next 2. So over 1 and under 2, and bring it to the opposite side. So that wire furthest towards the right, in this case here, has now moved from the right and joined the left group instead, which means we now have 4 wires on the left. And what we can also start to do is just pull the 2 groups apart a little bit. So that means the next step is starting from the left, because that now has the 4 wires, and it's the same principle. Now obviously this is just the beginning, so it can be a little bit messy also till we get into the proper kind of rhythm, but just do the same thing. The very outer one goes over 1 and then under 2. So that includes the one we just brought over from the other side. And then join the other side. And then that outer one comes into the middle instead, just like the first one. So this is basically the basic structure. Now it might start to look a little weird here. So that's, like I said, because wire reacts differently than cord would. It doesn't just kind of blend in together nicely. So therefore what I personally like to do is when I'm moving my wire and making braids is, again, now because there's 4 on the right here, I'm going to take the outer one, go over 1, but before I do that I just like to push that down a little bit, so basically against the other wire that it's coming over, like that, and then bring it over that and then underneath the other. What you can then do is possibly push them up a little bit, and basically what this does is creates a little bit more space and it makes the braid a bit tighter. So like that, and then we just kind of flatten them down again, and then that wire has joined the other side. So this will become kind of easier to do once we've done a few rounds in the braid here, and basically we're in the rhythm of it. So again, the outer one goes over 1, but before I do, I just want to push that down a little bit, so bring it over there, and then the other 2 it goes under. You can just push up a little bit and then bring it to the other side. And every time I'm moving my wire as well as I'm bringing it over, I always run my fingers and hands through it there just to smooth out the wire, because obviously just letting them down as we're working with it, it might get a little bit misshapen. So just keep smoothing out your wires. But this is basically the rhythm of it. So what I'm going to do is just, I like to have a little section here at the beginning before we add in any beads or anything. So now I've got a couple centimeters of the braid done here. Then I want to start adding in my beads. So what I'm going to do is pick out the next wire that I'm due to move. So in this case here, it's on my right side, the very outer one. And I'm going to pick out that outer one and then grab a bead, get the bead onto that wire, and then let it drop all the way down to sit right there where it won't go any further. Now otherwise, other than adding the bead in, everything else stays the same. So that means that the very next wire, which is the second one in, I'm going to push down a bit, and then the next two I'm going to push up a bit before I then bring this wire with now the bead on over that first one and under the next two, and just make sure that that bead stays on the outer edge there so it kind of gets trapped into that corner, and then bring the wire all the way over and then flatten them back down. So the basic principle is exactly the same, now just adding in the beads along the edge on both sides there. So that's that side. Now this left side has 4 wires, which means I need to move that very outer one, but before I do, I just separate it out, grab a bead, add that on and let it drop all the way down. And again, push down the next one in and push up the next two. So we'll kind of create a little opening for this wire to go straight through. And again, make sure that bead stays on the outer edge so it gets trapped into that little corner. And then bring it in to the group on the other side. And again, smoothing out the wires, flattening these ones back down. And there you can see, I've now started adding in my beads, and that's basically just the principle of that. So next is the right one, the very outer one here. Add in the bead before we make any movement. Let it drop down. And then otherwise just continue. And you just want to keep doing this until you have the length of braid that we need. When I then reach the other end here, I'm then just going to continue doing a few more stitches in the braid, but without beads. So again, I'm just starting on the right side in this case here, because that's the next one I'm due to use. And otherwise do the same braid structure, just don't add beads in, because I'm then just going to use the ends here without beads to finish off using those ribbon ends, because obviously we don't want to get beads trapped inside of those. So just do that for about the same length that we have the other end. And then it's time to finish off both of the ends. So first of all, we need to deal with these wires here on the ends, because obviously they all won't fit inside of the actual ribbon ends. So we need to get rid of them. And it's the same on both ends, of course. So I'm just going to show you on one. Now I'm going to get out my heavy duty flush cutters, because we're going to be going through the braid here. And what you can do is just use the ribbon end itself as kind of a gauge to where to cut. So you want to place it where it's going to end up being placed on the braid. And then obviously kind of gauge what part of the braid is going to end up being inside. And then you'll know where you need to cut across. So I know I need to cut around there. And then what's left here from obviously the last bead is then going to fit nicely inside of the ribbon end. So you just want to then start from one side and then basically cut just a few wires at a time straight across to the other side. Just kind of get rid of the wires along the way. All the way so we more or less get a straight line. Doesn't have to be perfect obviously, but the aim is then to have that straight line. And just cut off a bit more there to get it a little bit straighter. Just get all these wires out of the way. And then this should fit nicely inside of that ribbon end. And we don't have loads of bulk with the excess wires that we cut off as well. And what I'm then going to do here is then grab my E6000 glue, and I'm just going to be using a toothpick to help apply this, because it's these metal ribbon ends are going to be on metal wires. So if we don't use the glue, there's not really going to be much of a grip there, and they'll probably just come sliding straight off. So I'm using the glue onto the toothpick. Now it doesn't have to be too much, just enough so I can add that inside of the ribbon end here. And it's just really about coating the inside walls, and then obviously having a little bit there. We don't need to fill it up completely because it's going to get clamped down, and then whatever's excess is just going to come spilling out. But just a nice coating, a bit like that. And then what I like to do is, what I have excess on my toothpick, or if you need to add a bit more, I always like to add at the end of the braid there that I cut ready, and make sure I get it in between the wires, because when we then put the two things together and obviously the glue dries, it's going to adhere nicely. Now I actually just want to add a little bit more, just so I know I get a nice strong bond between the two. And really get it in between the nooks and crannies of the wire. So just like that. And then once you have that, then it is time to put the two together. So just put the ribbon end over the end of the braid there, and then I like to hold onto the piece in my hand and then put a finger on either side to hold it in place while I then start to clamp it down. Now I like to go in and do it gently, a bit at a time, rather than just one place and clamp it all the way down. And then when I'm almost done, I just like to remove my fingers and just check that it's still sitting how I want it to, because obviously you can slide a little bit, but if you're happy with it, you can go in, do the final clamps really nice and tight. And I also just like to make sure I go in from the sides, and then it will be on there nice and tight. But obviously that glue, once that dries, it's going to add a lovely extra strength to the piece as well. Now of course, repeat the other end, and then we're going to have these loops where we can attach our findings. Then all that's left to do, once I've attached my findings as well now, is to shape the bracelet. So you can either shape this around something that has the size and shape you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel, or you can just use your hands and fingers. So what I like to do is go in and start adding a curve to it. Now make sure obviously that the front of the bracelet is facing outward, but then just add a gentle curve and then go back and forth and add more and more of a curve, rather than going into one place and make a big bend. That'll make it out of shape. But then basically the goal is to get the two ends here close together so we can of course use the clasp. And then the bracelet is ready to wear. And we achieve a really cool effect of the wire braid, but then with the beads along the edges that can add a lovely bit of colour or even some sparkle depending what beads you use. So if you like wire braid designs, I have loads more on my channel so you can check that out. Otherwise, I really hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.